I am Gina Penzig. I am with Evergy. I am the manager of external communications. Hold on, I'm getting a message here. They want to make sure that I know it's being recorded. Okay, there we go. So I am the external communications manager at Evergy. And I first of all will let you know that I don't usually present in Zoom. So if I'm a little bit clunky with the software, my apologies. Also, Morgan and the KACEE team have promised to help if folks have questions along the way to make sure that that you help get my attention, and I'd love to answer those as we go. So today we're going to talk a little bit about energy and extreme weather events, specifically talking a little bit about what happened last February, where there was a pretty widespread collapse of the power grid in Texas, and we had some emergency interruptions here at home as well. So in my role as an external communications manager, I'm usually able to talk a little bit about a lot of things. So if we get too deep into technical questions, I'll have to take those and find an engineer to help me out. The plus side of having me versus the engineer is it tends to be a little bit easier to understand most of the time. So first of all, just Evergy is the local electric utility for a portion of Kansas and Missouri. You can see here the area that we serve, and we have a combination of generation sources that we use, ranging from natural gas and coal plants to nuclear to wind, solar, and even some landfill gas in both states. So here we've got a look at the US power grid from kind of a wide perspective. And so all of the wires and things that you see outside your house are part of a bigger machine. It's actually been said that the power grid is one of the biggest machines in the world. And it's separated into 3 sections. And so you'll notice that Texas is down there kind of by itself. They decided that they didn't really want to play with the rest of the country. And so they have their own power grid. Then you see the Western power grid that starts a little bit east of the Rockies, goes west, and then you have the rest of the country. Now, combining these 3 sections of power grids are some interconnection points. So it's not that they don't talk to each other or work together at all, but it can become congested pretty easily. If you think about living in a city where there's a bridge that maybe connects 2 major portions of the city and it gets backed up at different times, it's kind of similar to that. So as we talk about the power grid and the different pieces of it, we're going to go from the generation sources to your home. I didn't make the slide, so the fact that it's going right to left, I'm sorry. So we start out on the right at the generation sources. And so these, whether it be a wind farm or a coal plant or a natural gas plant, nuclear, a lot of times they are placed away from the population centers. And so then you build large transmission lines that traverse the countryside and get them to the cities and the towns where folks live and the energy is consumed. Along the way, you have substations. A job of a substation is to change the voltage of the energy that's flowing through the lines. So so higher voltage is better at efficiently traveling long distances. So that's why you have the large lines that are connecting the power plant to the cities. And then the lower voltage is safer for your local consumption and also helps to fit to your home use. So if you have a substation in and around your neighborhood, it's taking that energy from that transmission level voltage down to that substation level and then to distribution. And that is usually about a 12 kV line. Through most communities, that is going to then connect to a transformer that's near your house. And then there's going to be a line that is either overhead or underground that actually connects your home then to the power grid, and that's how you get your electric. If you've ever had that line come down after a storm, you know it has to be fixed in order for things to come back on. So a couple of ways that energy is measured when you use it at home. Most of us are pretty familiar. Our bill is based on how much we use. So how many megawatt hours, or in home use, kilowatt hours you consume over the course of a month is what sets your bill. And so that's one important piece of it. But the other part, and the power grid has to be built to meet this, is the capacity, or the load measurement. And so this is, if you think about energy is like how much water goes through a hose, capacity is how big is the hose. And so the bigger that hose needs to be, the more equipment is required to make sure that it can be delivered. When you start getting into small businesses and to some school rates, then they will actually have a line item on their bill that is based on that capacity. It's based on that peak load that's required. And so, and part of the reason is because we have to make sure that need is met at the time of highest demand. And one of the examples I had used with Rachel is if maybe you have a bakery and your baker comes in first thing in the morning, flips on all of the lights, turns on all of the ovens, starts the mixer, and energy use spikes. It goes up super high, and stays that way for a little bit while they're getting things going. But then the rest of the day, it kind of levels off. Well, that peak demand is going to be hit in that morning time when the baker has come in. And so that's going to cause their bill to be higher because there's more equipment required to meet that need. So one of the things they can do is look for ways to change how they operate in the morning to help flatten that out. And so it might be that they realize they don't need to turn on all of the ovens at once, or maybe the lighting in the main part of the bakery doesn't need to be on in the beginning. Maybe it's just the lighting in the kitchen. So there are some behavior changes that they can make to help flatten out that peak. If you've been in an older home, or if you have an older home, maybe you have a wall that you know that if maybe if the dishwasher's running, the microwave's plugged in, and you plug the vacuum into a certain outlet, you're going to blow the fuse. So you can do one of two things. You can either upgrade your fuse box, which is going to cost a lot of money, or you can find someplace else to plug in the vacuum where you can do it at another time. So again, behavior change to make sure that your system is able to handle the load. Here we've got a quick look at the different forms of electricity generation in the US. And we'll talk a little bit about how these different forms of energy, all of them are challenged. When we had the cold spell back in February, it wasn't that one was outperforming the others, or that one really kind of came out as being the golden ticket to figuring these things out. All of them had their challenges. In Kansas and Missouri, we don't use a lot of petroleum for power generation. There are a few plants that use it to start up, but for the regular generation, generally that's not a fuel that we use. So I don't know how many of you were paying attention to the news during Winter Storm Uri. But one of the things that you may have heard for maybe the first time was people started talking about the Southwest Power Pool and how the Southwest Power Pool needed energy. And gosh, who the heck is that? And why would our lights go out? Because they need energy. So the Southwest Power Pool is one of several organizations that help manage the transmission and generation system in the country. And the idea is that getting beyond just like those Evergy borders, getting beyond the state borders, having that broader range of coverage is going to result in a more efficient system. And so they look at, are there power lines that are needed to get the energy from wind farms in Western Kansas to either Eastern Kansas, or maybe even into Missouri, and in some cases beyond into Illinois and to the Eastern coast. So how do we take that power, get it moved out to the areas that it needs to be? And then also, how do we look at it so that the most cost-effective generation is running first, so that we can bring prices down for everyone? The other element to this is that by pooling all the resources, if one power plant goes down, that utility doesn't necessarily have to have emergency interruptions. It can call on its neighbors to get assistance. And in fact, there had been an event like that in Omaha a couple of years ago where they had a major plant go down and they were able to lean on the Southwest Power Pool and avoid emergency interruptions. So we get to February, and one of the things that happened is that we had a good portion of the United States plunged into really cold temperatures for several days. And so where normally you would start borrowing from one another, maybe we've got a cold spell here in, Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri. We start looking to the utilities who are maybe in Arkansas or Illinois or someplace else and say, hey, we need some support here. And we would import power to help meet that need. Well, all of a sudden everybody's at capacity. So there's not a lot of opportunity for those imports. And so we started getting alerts the week before the winter storm happened and started looking at what are the ways we can make sure that our power plants are running the best they can, so that we can make sure that every power plant we have is available as much as it can be. And so this included looking at how much coal was available for coal plants. This was looking a lot at natural gas constraints because that was at a premium right then. It was making sure that the nuclear plant in Burlington, Kansas was up and running the best it could be. And then it also was looking at what the expectations were for the wind and the solar. So let's start looking at that and start looking at the demand that we expect from customers because it's really cold outside. And the realization was that there might not be enough energy to meet demand. The Southwest Power Pool has been around for 80 years. They'd planned for that eventuality or that potential for a good portion of those years. It had never happened before. I've been with the utility for 20 years. We have drills, we have plans. We're ready to manage that situation that if it ever happens. I even got so far a couple times as writing a news release to prepare people for emergency outages. Had never had to submit before. So here we are, Valentine's Day weekend, and looking out and starting to realize from the SPP that even though we're doing all of the things we can to make the generation run the best it can, we're still coming up short. So we put out a call to our customers and asked them to conserve. And for residential customers, this is just, can you close your blinds? Can you turn down your heat a little bit? What are some things you can do to really kind of cut back your energy use at home? For larger businesses, it's us calling them and saying, hey, we need you to shut down. We need you to not open your operations so that we can keep that energy available for other customers. One of the interesting things that tends to happen when utilities put out a public call for conservation is that in the very beginning, usage goes up. We don't know why, because we haven't tried to study and survey and get a clear answer to that, but consistently after that call initially goes out, you'll see an increase in usage. So we were prepared for that. We got to Monday morning and we received calls from the SPP that said we were going to actually have to go into emergency interruptions. And so put the plan in place. And in fact, I'm going to go, I think, next slide. So put the plan in place and actually started having some outages that rolled through parts of the service area. And so I've already talked about, you've got that extreme cold, you've got the higher than normal electricity demand, you've got high heating and demand for natural gas. So this comes into play in a couple of ways. So first of all, natural gas is prioritized for home heating, which it should be. So power plants all of a sudden are having a hard time getting enough natural gas to operate because it's needed for residential use so that people can stay safe and warm in their homes. then you get disruptions to the gas supply. So not only is it in high demand, we're starting to have areas where its actual availability is becoming disrupted. Prices go up. I think a lot of people have heard about some of the extreme prices that have come out of this storm. And so for those of us in Kansas and Missouri, utilities are regulated. So how those prices get passed along is a little bit different, and hopefully is spread out over a longer period. There were some pretty horrific stories that came out of Texas where they're deregulated and prices fluctuate with the market. Let's see, we also had lack of gas regeneration, which I just talked about. Fuel inventory shortages. So I'd mentioned before that every form of generation has benefits and challenges. Coal is, from an environmental perspective, is horrible. Needs to be phased out. From the fact that you can put a pile of fuel there on the ground next to a power plant and have it at your disposal when you need it and not worry about its availability, not worrying about whether the Mother Nature is restricting it, has a lot of value. And we haven't yet figured out how to replace that value. Now, we ran into some challenges because we had frozen coal piles. So we, in fact, we had a picture of an employee who was just icy and had been out trying to break up the coal so that it could power the power plant. Let's see. So we had, like I said, forced outages due to freezing in some of the cases. Low wind and solar resource. Now, we expected wind and solar to be low this time of year, but they were even lower than projected. Part of that was there was some icing on some of the wind turbines. And then, of course, solar and that cold. Now, some folks are like, hey, there are wind turbines, you know, in states north of us that are, you know, why are these frozen? Well, you build based on the expected climate that you'll be operating in. And so you kind of factor in, there's a balance of cost and reliability and availability anytime you do these things. And so rather than spend extra money for wind turbines that are maybe more ready, more prepared to operate in a colder climate, you realize that your wind generation during certain times of year, during certain temperatures, will be limited, and you save and you build again the wind turbine that best meets that climate. So icing and snow cover, we talked about that a little bit. And then so we got into constrained inter-regional imports. And so this kind of goes back to the slide where we saw the three segments of the national power grid, and then we'll go back here. Okay, maybe not. That's going to be a lot to go back to. But where you saw the different power pools are connected. So normally you kind of go knock on your neighbor's door and say, hey, do you have some extra because we need it? And in these circumstances, the answer was no. They didn't. They needed to meet their customers' needs first. So some of the things we learned from Winter Storm Uri, first of all, how important it is that we figure out and make sure that we can provide reliable service during extreme events. It was really hard, even though we knew we federally, by law, had to implement those outages. Hard to do. The challenges of relying largely on natural gas, and then also the value of having fuel diversity and on-site fuel, which we talked about a little bit, and then their interdependence on neighboring regions during extreme events. In this case, because our neighbors were in a similar circumstance, that interdependence, which usually is a benefit to the system, wasn't helpful. So everybody's, you know, now like, okay, what are you going to do to make sure this doesn't happen again? And so from a Southwest Power Pool perspective, they're re-examining when plants may be offline for maintenance to make sure that things are available. They are having a lot of discussion with natural gas providers to figure out if there's a better way to balance the need of power generation versus making sure that that doesn't compromise the availability for residential. There is also a lot of discussion on if there's additional transmission needed in order to be able to move that power in and out of areas where it's needed during events. And then there's also just investing in the power grid so that it runs more efficiently and is more hardy, knowing that while Uri hopefully was an outlier, we're seeing more extreme weather events than we have in the past. So yeah, one of the things that's changing is how we generate power. You're seeing a lot more renewables on the system than there was 10 years ago. We're also looking at electrification. And so one of the things that electrification does is helps make the power grid more efficient by increasing use, hopefully during off-peak times. So you'll hear a lot about utilities that are encouraging the development of electric transportation. And with that, a lot of utilities are trying to set prices so that people are incentivized to charge their vehicle at night. And what that does is it helps make the power grid more efficient, because at night, those resources, those power plants aren't being used as much as during the daytime. A growing number of distributed resources. Now, this can be a community solar project that is in a community that's in a city and is supplying neighbors, or this could be a private individual who has invested in solar. One of the challenges, or one of the things you have to keep in mind if you take that step, is that unless you spend some extra money, which sometimes can be quite a lot of extra money, that solar isn't providing power to your home when the power grid is not available, because there's a conversion that has to happen. So I had a friend who's like, yeah, I'm going to put up some solar panels so that I can at least keep my refrigerator and my heater running if we lose power. And I was like, it doesn't quite work quite that easily. So there are ways around it, but it costs quite a bit extra. And then the other challenge that we have is the power grid's aging. And so a lot of the power grid was built out anywhere from the 1950s to the 1980s, which it hurts me every time when I realize how long ago the 1980s were. So there's a lot of investment that's needed to bring it up to date. And whether that's just making sure that wood poles are replaced and more sturdy, or if that's putting in automation that can better predict how much load, how much power is going through lines, and whether or not equipment needs to be replaced. So as an electric utility, we kind of have a special way that we define resiliency. And that is looking at the ability to anticipate, prepare for, and adapt to changing conditions, and withstand, respond to, and recover rapidly from disruptions through adaptable and holistic planning and technical solutions. I mentioned that I'm sometimes easier to understand than an engineer. I came from a group of engineers, and absolutely important and effective. And that is what we have entire teams that spend their time looking at how to make the power grid more resilient. So what are some of the ways we do that? Talked a little bit already about distributed resources, whether those be a community solar resource or solar on your home, building out system redundancy. So sometimes it is simple as making sure that there are 2 or 3 different sets of transmission lines that bring power into a community, so that if a tornado takes one of those out, there are other ways to get power to that community. Of course, just simply replacing aging assets with things that are newer is going to help. And then expanding automation. So one of the things we had to factor in when we got into the emergency outages was that there are certain locations where it still requires somebody to get into a truck, drive to a location, get out their equipment, and actually flip a physical switch to get power back on. there's a lot of automation that is now available. Those fortunately have gotten to be where they're more the exception that manual requirement, but that still exists in some places. So expanding that automation so that if you would have to implement interruptions and you tell folks that, hey, it's going to be 30 minutes, you can stick to that 30 minutes. The other piece is maintaining a diverse fuel mix. So that's continuing to figure out what mix of generation is going to perform best in extreme temperatures, what's going to provide a little bit of an insurance policy if we have extreme grid conditions again. Hardening for extreme weather. So this comes into making your power lines more robust. Here's another place where balance is important, especially if you're building transmission or different power lines in a city. In a population area, you've got to balance how you're affecting that community with the somewhat industrial build versus how resilient that infrastructure is. And then securing fuel supply. And again, this gets back to talking about, I mentioned coal, but nuclear as well is one of the key benefits it provides is that you store the fuel there on site. So those are my slides. You know, we talked a little bit about the demand and the consumption. And as you start to, before I turn things over to Rachel, you probably can work with your school's facilities department and get information on both of those things, where if you want to do some investigation actually using data from your local school and your local classrooms, that's available. And so I'd encourage looking at it that way. I think that demand charges have become more frequent, more common for even residential customers in some part of the country. I don't know that we would see that happen here, but day when electric use is being consumed. So Missouri right now is really pushing time of use pricing, which means that in the summer, utilities are under a lot of pressure to charge more for your using power during the heat of the afternoon than during other parts of the day. So definitely important to start thinking about those usage patterns and learning a little bit more than just total consumption when you're thinking about saving energy.
Awesome. Good job, Gina.
Thanks.
You put a name to the face when we're in emergency panic mode. We'll know it's you behind the scenes, panicking on our behalf.
I think people were tired of me that week.
Right.
Let's see. I saw a question about the solar and that it's not. So when you, a couple things with that can be a little bit complicated for solar, and Kansas Leadership Center actually helped the energy company and several solar advocates and environmental advocates kind of put together a discussion guide that kind of talked about some of the challenges with private solar and the price modeling, and that's probably beyond really what we want to get into today. So your solar panels, the power that they produce is a DC current, and the power grid, the power system in your home is AC. So there has to be a conversion that happens there for them to actually be able to, for you to consume that power within your house. And that converter usually is hooked to the power grid. So if you lose power to your home, that converter suddenly doesn't work and your solar panels can't power your home. You can overcome that through extra investment, but that's where those systems start to get pretty expensive. That's also where you hear about Tesla's Powerwall and batteries, and that will be the future at some point. Right now, again, the expense of doing that, a very few people are able to make that investment.
All right. Oh, you got another one.
Okay. So this is, and I meant to kind of work this in. So a couple things. So first of all, the utilities and the Southwest Power Pool are kind of faced with a balance of we had this storm, we had these conditions that we had a once in 80-year event. So do you upend everything you're doing for something that has happened one time in 80 years? But at the same time, you've seen more extreme weather, you've seen more storms, you've seen a lot of changes. And so you're pretty sure it's not 80 years before it happens again. So you still have to learn, you still have to see what do you change to reduce the risk on this. So on one hand, yes, we have definitely, the Southwest Power Pool is made some changes in how it works with utilities to make sure power plants are available. There's been talk with the natural gas providers to make sure fuel is available for power plants. There has been discussion of adding transmission lines to make sure power can be moved more efficiently from one place to another. All of these things working toward prevention. However, I can't stand here and say it will never happen again. We did learn some things about having to go through the process. Like I said, we had tabletopped this many times. As anybody knows, it doesn't matter how many times you tabletop something, going through the reality is different. And so we started to learn some things as far as like the controlled outages that were implemented, which were necessary so that the entire grid didn't get out of balance. Better ways to do that. And so one of the things we're preparing for on a local level is, in the unfortunate situation, if we would ever be called on again for emergency interruptions, is to do a better job at keeping those short. So maybe not the answer, like I said, doing our best to prevent, but also doing our best to make sure that we could minimize the impact if it had to happen again. Let's see. I don't have an answer to the wind generation versus the solar. It's interesting because when I first started working in energy efficiency about 14 years ago, I spent some time in energy efficiency. And at that point, private wind turbines were fairly popular, especially in rural areas. And now you don't hear about them nearly as much. So good question. I'm sorry I don't have an answer. Yeah. So this is a great question too. So as solar is, so we're starting to see we're starting to see with both wind and solar, as it becomes more common, as it's starting to, one of the things you're seeing in Kansas is that primary rural real estate where wind farms were pretty accepted is becoming fairly congested. And so they've slowly been developing more toward the population areas. And as that's happened, there's been more controversy in communities. There's been more discussion about whether or not that's something that communities want to have. For a very long time, our position as a utility was that community acceptance was one of the things that we considered if we were going to buy into a project. There were enough projects available that had great community acceptance that you didn't have to jump into the debate of what's going on in Johnson County right now, what we're seeing up in north central Kansas with the wind farm, similarly in southeast Kansas. We still, for the most part, as a utility, have been trying to kind of stay out of that local discussion, very much have a position that fewer regulations are preferred, and to kind of let other things help dictate as far as market and such. So it's a difficult decision. Sedgwick County kind of had a similar discussion a few years ago of trying to figure out, they put a lot of restrictions that basically you're not going to build a wind farm in Sedgwick County which I'm not sure anybody would try with so much aviation. But they started to extend that into solar. So we as a company haven't really taken an active position in that yet. But it's probably at some point we're going to have to.
All right, well, keep your questions coming for Gina, everybody. Those are great questions. And Gina, thank you so much. I know that's complex stuff, so I can't even imagine talking to anybody else about it. So good job. All right. Well, everyone, my name is Rachel Wahle, and I'm the Kansas Green Schools Coordinator for KACEE. And the Green Schools program, if you don't know too much about it, has been around since 2008. And we currently have almost 500 schools or school districts across the state of Kansas who are a part of the network. And what's cool about the network is it's free for teachers, partners to join and be a part of this network. And then once you are a part of the network, what's neat about it is you have access to the 5 green school investigations. Well, each of the 5 green schools investigations are in partnership with the National Wildlife Federation's Eco Schools program, and then also the Project Learning Trees Green Schools program. So it's pretty amazing because schools can apply for not only state, but nationwide recognition by going through and completing these investigations. And what's neat about it is because we're in partnership with NWF and PLT, by completing our investigation, they're kind of killing 3 birds with 1 stone just because of that partnership. So the 5 investigations that are available are, first of all, the energy investigation, which is sponsored by Evergy. We also have the water investigation, which really looks at water conservation, water quality. We have the waste and recycling investigation. We have the learning community, which looks at the school grounds and maybe school gardening. And then the last one is the healthy school environment, which looks at things like chemical use, indoor and outdoor air quality, transportation, idling, all those things. And so with the energy investigation, that's probably one of my, probably not just mine, but it's everybody's favorite, because the investigations are designed to really build support for a school. Times what we experience in the green schools world is that maybe it's one teacher at a school who's really excited about environmental education, and then when that person leaves, maybe all the work that they work toward kind of falls apart. And so the green schools investigations and really going through them are all about really kind of building a team, and not just one teacher leading the charge, but truly to build a collaborative effort with community members, with student engagement. And these are designed to go all the way from the technically, we're actually working on an early childhood green schools investigation now, which is done. Happy to say it's not out yet, but it is done. All the way ranging through high school level. So from pre-K to 12th grade, there's green school investigations. And so the collaborative, oh yeah, sorry.
Real quick, there's a question.
Oh,
Can
okay.
an education facility that provides formal and non-formal education opportunities be a green school?
Yes. Yes. So we do have some like non-formal partners, and they completed the green schools investigations. And so they're just more of like a green site, but yes, you can do that. Yeah. Good question, Elaine. All right. So the energy investigation and all of the investigations are really designed to be hands-on, getting the kids engaged, but the process of it is, I think, the coolest part, because the energy investigation asks things just like Gina was talking about, where does our helping students understand, like, where does our energy come from? And what they learn from completing these investigations is knowledge that they can transfer home to school, or I'm sorry, from the school to home. Every investigation has a home connection, a piece that they can do with their family at home to learn and engage at home, maybe make their own improvements at their home. But the parts of the energy investigation are really trying to explore, where does our energy come from? And kind of like Gina said, you want to understand when your highest uses are happening. And so the investigation has students try to obtain a bill, like an energy bill, and see how much their average energy bill costs, where are their peak times being used, can they identify why their peak times are during that time. They actually do calculations to figure out how much it costs to provide energy per classroom in their school based on the calculations that they're going to learn. The three main components of the energy investigation are, first, it looks at heating and cooling of your school building. And it's, looking at individual classrooms where the students are using temperature guns, the infrared temperature guns, and they're looking at the window and saying, well, why is it cooler over there if it's winter? Like, why is it cooler over there versus it in the center of the room? And so they're just kind of exploring and noting, well, that's interesting. Why is that? And after they complete each kind of segment, so the heating and cooling section of the investigation, they're really collecting that data, not only from all the classrooms, and they can absolutely extrapolate, if all the classrooms are pretty similar, you can extrapolate some data there depending on how, large your school or site is. But you're also looking at the other spaces. So maybe your office, the gym, a cafeteria. And so you're compiling this data. And so you really have a strong look at your school, not only in heating and cooling, but also the indoor and outdoor lighting investigation is fascinating. The kids figure out how much it costs to light their classroom. And so it's phenomenal for our friendly math teachers out there of the world to really teach, how to work through the math to figure out how much it costs to light this one classroom. My favorite part is the kids are standing, well, I should say that, they're safely, sometimes it depends on the teacher, but they might be standing on their teacher's desk, depending on the age, and they're, taking the light bulbs down from the ceiling, and they're trying to figure out, is this an LED bulb? Is it a T5? Is it a T8? Is it a T12? What are the energy efficiency differences between all of those? And so it's fantastic, and it's really fun. The kids love doing that. And so again, if they know how much it costs, they have to figure out, well, how many hours on average is this classroom on? And, how can we reduce the energy for lighting our classrooms and lighting our schools? So they're putting together an action plan based on the data they collect. And then the last section of the investigation looks at appliances. And, they're doing some watt calculations. How much does it cost to, keep our computers plugged in? Do we turn them off all at night? Are we turning off the power strips? All those things. And so all the real world skills that they're learning are relevant for now, but also they're going to take it into their future. The other thing that I think is really cool about the kind of movement of this being a pre-K through 12th grade is we actually, a couple years ago, just had our first green district get recognized and certified. So from the pre-K level all the way till the high school, every school actually completed the 2 of the investigations. And that's how you get the statewide and nationwide recognition, is that you've completed at least 2 and you receive a Silver Globe Award. That's kind of like the low hanging fruit. And then as you move up, when you complete 3 out of the 5, then you're moving into a Gold Globe level, and 5 out of 5 is a Green Globe. And that just means at that point, you've completed all 5 of the investigations. Each globe level has different kind of requirements. And so it's that your team has gotten larger at your school, meaning you have more buy-in of support, so that eventually it's just a part of the culture. So that's what the energy investigation is all about. I'll share my screen and show you how to access the investigations if you would like to check it out. So kansasgreenschools.org is the website, over here, if I wasn't logged in, it would say log in or create an account. And so you can actually go up here on this map and you can view a map and you can actually see if your school is already a part of the network. Oh, I'm sorry. It says Java. Sorry. I'm not in my Chrome right now, but there's a map right here. And so you can go and view all the schools, but you could also view it through the list. And so if you had a city you wanted to look at, you could go in here and look at a list, and you can look at different people's green teams and what they're doing. So if you want to see if a school that you're associated with already has a profile, then you can go in and look for that profile. To learn more about the recognitions or how to get recognized. So it's called the Kansas Green Schools of Excellence program, and you can choose the different levels. So there's the silver globe, the gold, and the green. And here are the 5 investigations. So today we were talking about the energy investigation. And so right here is the energy investigation. There's home connections. And this just truly walks you through how to complete the investigation. Okay, so the other thing that I'm super excited about that during COVID, I know that threw everybody for a loop and how we were all working. And so during COVID, and we created an online platform that people can actually register and take different courses with us. So we have an early childhood environmental education course right now, but we also have what's called right here, you can see the Kansas Green School Leader EE credential. And when you take this, you can actually get 1 hour of graduate credit through Baker University. And so that's exciting, but there's a whole course and it takes you from beginning to end on how to build a green team. We have done it and it has proven to work. And it's really neat because when you go through each of these modules, there's interviews with different teachers on how they overcame this situation or how they really made this work for them. Or it's just so proud of this. It's just a labor of love for sure. So this is the energy investigation, and you can actually go to our website, which is www.kacee.org. And Morgan, the amazing woman that she is, has all these available online where you can register and take just the energy investigation if you wanted to. And so with this energy investigation, it literally walks you through. It's like someone's holding your hand and takes you through everything that we were talking about, but more in how-to guides and all that. And so this is available that people can independently register for just individual modules. So if there was a teacher who just wanted to learn more about the energy investigation, how to do it, they could just register for that, or they could take the whole credential course. And then also, I'll just kind of point out one other thing that we've been doing, what we've been up to with green schools. Right here under professional development, here is the Green Leader EE credential. And so if you ever want more information, you can hop in there and check that out. And then I'll go back to that. But the other thing that has been really pretty darn cool is, so here's the Green Leader EE credential. So this is going to run again in February. So the cutoff is, January, February, all that. This gives you the details. So it'll kick off in February, and the registration deadline is February 2nd. But the other thing that we're doing, and it's also, you can check it out on our Green Schools website if you want more, or I'm sorry, on the KACEE website, is last spring, we started the Kansas Green Schools Virtual Academy. And that's been really fun because we actually did the Virtual Academy last spring, and schools can sign up. And so last spring, it was the energy investigation. So we all worked together on Zooms with classrooms, and we all kind of came together either once a month or once a week, depending on, the schools' schedules. And we had touch points and actually walked through the entire investigation, but broke it into chunks. So it was like, okay, by next week, here are some goals for you guys. And then the kids would check back in and say what they learned and any challenges they had, they could brainstorm together. Right now, we're doing the waste and recycling investigation, which is coming to a close. And in the spring, if you want to register, we're doing the water investigation all together for the virtual academy in the spring. So the energy investigation is critical, and it's amazing to have students know how to find that information and know how at such a young age that they can make a difference and they can make an impact, and really being able to share that with their own student body and make those changes. So that is what I have, my friends. And if there's, I'll give it, yep, go ahead. Any questions?
Hi, I'm not much of a typer texter, so I wanted to verbally ask this question, but we here, I'm in Lawrence, and we have done this energy investigation several times, and I will attest that it's really fun and kids get engaged. But my question is, part of the action plan that some of my students have had in the past is to create a voluntary brownout, and they were wondering if that is something that they could do every month or implement every week, and whether it's maybe just symbolic or if it truly does have some energy reduction in terms of the school's bill. And I guess maybe I need to look through the history, but I didn't know if that was, and maybe Gina could address that. I don't know if that's truly something that can be done in a worthwhile way. So thank you.
Hold on, let me push the buttons in the right order. So yeah, I think it would be a great experiment, and some of it might be a little bit of it depends on how you look at your window. I think any of us know, if you like leave your air conditioner, your furnace off all day and let your house reach whatever temperature, and then you come home and turn everything on, then that energy draw is pretty high. Where if you take a little more moderated stance and just turn it down some, you don't see quite as extreme, because like, especially in the summer with cooling, it's working a lot to get some of that humidity and moisture out of the air. Also kind of goes back to that bakery example I gave of the energy to start things up, and finding that balance between is that equipment using more energy to get started back up versus if you're letting things come on. So I think depending on how much time you spent in that brownout state and how you came out of it, definitely potential there for savings, and probably some really awesome lessons for how your students start to learn how all these things work together.
Well, cool. Are there any other questions? If not, I think we can go ahead and wrap up. And we just want to say thank you again to Rachel and Gina. This was on fairly short notice, and they did an amazing job. So this is super fun. This session will be recorded, and we'll send that out so you can watch it or share it with others if you'd like to. And Rachel, I don't know, do you want to share your contact information here in case anyone has questions about green schools? You could put it in the chat. And yeah, I think that's it, unless anybody else has anything else to add.
Thanks
Thank
for
you,
putting it
guys.
together, Morgan.
Welcome.
Hey, David, tell us more about the resource you flagged. Practical engineering.
Oh, yeah. So I was doing some research because, I'm not an engineer and I'm in the engineering world trying to understand all this stuff. And so I came across this practical engineering. He is an engineer. He puts together videos on all kinds of engineering topics. I only watch the energy ones. But he talks about how the substations work, and so pretty much going along with what Gina was saying, just getting into a lot more detail, and he talks about some of the electrical concepts in there, but he does it in a way that it's even easy for a biologist like me to understand. So he just does he has animations in there, shows the actual equipment, so it's just a very educational. They're usually about 10 minutes long. And the one that he did on the Texas power grid shortage was just phenomenal. He talks about the power grid not just being available to, so yes, I would say appropriate for school age kids. He explains it that simply. And he talks about how the power grid's they're not just for reliability, but for the quality of the power, and how it has to be at 60 hertz. And if it gets down below 60 hertz, alarms will start going off. And the Texas power grid was at like 59 something, and they were like 4 minutes away from everything hitting an automatic shut off. It was incredible. And that's one of the reasons they were telling everybody to shed load, because as you shed the load, it increased the quality of the power that was on the grid. And that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to keep it up there. It was just very, very, very good. Okay, I'll put the link on the power. It's all on YouTube. That's the one to the Texas power shortage.
Thanks, David. Super cool, because Gina can't go to every classroom for sure. Well,
Yeah.
maybe she can. I don't know.
Yeah.
Gina's not going to unmute herself for that. Thank you so much to Branch Pattern for sponsoring this. And we can stick around for a few minutes if anybody else wants to ask any questions. But we really are grateful to Rachel and Gina for our BME today. So thank you. And thank you all for coming.